Hi, Dr. Paul. I have a small business, and I find it very difficult to hire people because of all the legal ramifications. If you hire somebody that's in a protected group, you might get sued, and there's so much withholding and bookkeeping and unemployment and workman's comp that it makes it extremely difficult to hire anyone unless you're a CPA and an attorney. I was wondering what you might do to make it easier for people to go and get a job.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point. In the last 2 or 3 years, it's not been made easier. You know, when you think about Obamacare, and if you're going to hire 10 more people and what that might mean for your costs, it would be very difficult bookkeeping and a greater cost. We have federal government involvement. You know, sometimes states are abusive too. If a state is abusive, businesses have the right to leave and go to a state. Maybe working conditions are better. Maybe it's a right to work state. Maybe wages are lower and they can move south and survive. But if a federal government regulation does it, we shouldn't have these. It sort of goes back to the previous question. If we're going to have some regulations, they should always be at the state. But the least amount of regulations is the best. Now, in Washington, sometimes these regulations, sometimes a law is passed which is very vague, and then we turn it over to the executive branch to write the regulations. I think that's all illegal and unconstitutional. The executive branch is not allowed to write regulations. They're the law of the land. The way is the Congress, they have a right to repeal those, but they're negligent and they just sit back and they give more authority to the executive branch all the time. That's one thing that I would do. I would repeal those regulations. I would be writing executive orders or signing statements to reduce those regulations. There's a lot to be done, but you have to change the sentiment. We have to change, and really to clean it up, you have to change the sentiment in Congress as well. But I think you express what is one of the biggest problems in this country and why we don't have economic growth. Not only do we have this debt burden, but we have a regulatory burden as well.
My question is, my name is Rick Flenberg from Iowa. What is your take on Obama pulling the troops out of Iraq, and do you think it's purely political, and do you think your message has a lot to do with them making that decision?
Good. That's a good question, because we won't know for sure exactly what it means until we see all the ramification. But nobody could complain that if on the surface that that's exactly what's going to happen, all the troops are going to be out by the end of the year. I don't think that's true. You know, we don't even know where all our troops are. You know, we have 900 bases. We're not about to give up all those bases. We just built $1 billion embassy. It's a fortress in Baghdad. And there are thousands of people that are working in there. And I did see one figure where one security force will be 5,500, but they'll be contractors. They'll make twice as much as the military, and we'll be there. Our CIA will be there. Our drones will be there. Our drones and maybe will be stationed around the border. If there's any skirmish going on, we will be there. It's not going to all of a sudden be something that we're going to treat like it's Switzerland. You know, it's not going to happen. Matter of fact, things are very bad in Iraq. I think the results have been horrible, not only because of the loss of life and the wounded that we had and all the death and all the money, $1 trillion we spent, but one ramification of all that, Saddam Hussein was a pretty bad guy. But do you know that the minority Christian element lived in Iraq for a couple thousand years, and they were tolerated, and matter of fact, Saddam Hussein actually had a Christian in his administration. But the Christians have essentially all been run out. There may be a few, but they're underground now. So that is the type of democracy that we have delivered. Matter of fact, there's a civil war going on in the north, and that was destined to happen. The Kurds live in the north. They want their independent country, and I don't blame them. I believe in self-determination. They have oil up there. And right now, the Turks and the Iraqis are allied closely together to subdue the independent-minded Kurds in the northern Iraq. There are already troops in Iraq, Turkish troops with thousands lined up at the border. And to think that we're just going to walk away from that, in no way. I dread the fact that we're right now building many more drone bases. We have 7,000 drones that are stationed around the world, operated out of Langley and out of New Mexico, where we can drop these bombs, at will, practically any spot in the world. The only problem with that is people resent us having these bases around the world. They resent us arbitrarily killing people, and a lot of people who aren't our targets, that collateral damage, and then they think this is making us safer. So no, I hope that they're right, but one of the reasons why they didn't come up with an agreement, and they've agreed to keep talking about it, is the one thing that we as a country insist on, that if we occupy their country, and then it's a mixture of them pretending they're running the country, like Karzai is supposed to be running Afghanistan, well that's about a farce too. But it happens in Japan and these other places when our military people get into trouble, we don't want them to be held accountable by their laws. And so what we want is a total exemption of any infraction of their laws so they can never be tried in those courts. And that's what we wanted by keeping our troops there openly, and they couldn't have a resolution on that. I predict that we will be very, very much involved in Iraq, and I think it will be unstable for a long time to come, and we will continue to spend a lot of money in Iraq, money that will be much better spent taking care of our people back here at home.
That's right.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good morning.
I think the only area that I'm not fully on board with you so far is with respect to the military and bringing our troops home. Under your administration, what would our response to another 9/11 look like?
Well, it would be different, but it would be tougher. Because I voted for the authority to go after those individuals responsible for 9/11. I supported that. And at that time, it was assumed that it was a band of Al-Qaeda that did it, and bin Laden was involved. So I voted for that authority, but it was only to go after the people, that were responsible, not to go into nation building and taking over the whole country of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I would have been much tougher in the battle at Tora Bora because we only had a couple hundred special forces there and we had them trapped. And all of a sudden we just faded away and we let the Northern Alliance, they'll take care of it. And immediately, within a week, we were using funds allotted for Afghanistan, and we used it to invade, Iraq and go after and start the Iraqi war. And we were told Al-Qaeda was there. There was no Al-Qaeda there. There's Al-Qaeda there now. As we walk away, that's another thing that's happening. There's Al-Qaeda there now. So I'd have been much tougher, much sooner, gone after bin Laden. And I also suggested, when I saw what was happening, and that we were going into nation building and fighting wars we shouldn't fight, I introduced a resolution to reactivate the principle of a letter of marque and reprisal. The founders understood that someday we might have to fight people rather than countries, and they were concerned about piracy. And they had a program where the Congress writes a letter, and they can use private sources as well as government sources, and gives the president the proper authority to go after particular individuals. And with our special forces and all, and with private sources, I think of what Ross Perot did. Remember in the 70s how it was blundered when Carter went in to try to get our hostages and we lost people? Well, Ross Perot had some of his workers trapped in Iran. So he hired some ex-special forces people. He went over there and rescued them. So I was thinking probably we should have just hired Ross Perot, give him $1 billion.